Welcome to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm a registered dietitian, health coach, and author, and I'm here to help you streamline your wellness routine and establish a sane, more balanced relationship with food and fitness so you can reach your goals without losing your mind. On this podcast, we'll talk about nutrition, exercise, self-care, mindset, and more. I'll be bringing you interviews and expert insight on the topics that matter to your health and wellness. Hi, and welcome back to the Drama-Free Healthy Living podcast. I'm your host, Jess Cording, and I'm so excited you're here with me today. I am talking all about neuropsychology with Dr. Julia DiGangi. So, Dr. DiGangi is a neuropsychologist who completed her residency at Harvard Medical School, Boston University School of Medicine, and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. She has nearly 2 decades of experience studying the connection between our brains and our behavior. She's worked with leaders at the White House press office, at global companies, international NGOs, as well as the U.S. Special Forces. She has a deep understanding of stress, trauma, and the resilience, which a lot of this is informed by her work in international development, humanitarian aid, where she serves some of the world's most vulnerable communities. The founder of NeuroHealth Partners, a neuropsychology-based consultancy, DiGangi shows people at work and at home how to harness the power of the brain to lead more satisfying and emotionally intelligent lives. She's the author of the book Energy Rising, and you can look at her work at drjuliadigangi.com. So we'll be sure to link to all of that in the show notes. You can find it. But I'm really excited to share our conversation today with you. We get pretty deep. We do talk about her, her path, what led her to focus on neuropsychology for her work. And then we get into some of the ways that our brain's activity influences our behavior. So, for example, the difference between feeling like we're in danger and actually being in danger, and how that can impact our nervous system and behaviors. We talk about why our nervous system likes familiarity and how that affects our emotions and behaviors. We also get into what she calls the over, so like overthinking, overworking, overgiving, and how they hold us back in our life. And really, some of those have those underlying feelings of unworthiness are the root of so many of these overs. Talk about how we try to fix feelings of unworthiness with all these external fixes. And, we also get into things such as what the opposite of uncertainty is and is not, how our desperate need for approval impacts our work and our life. We talk about why she doesn't like affirmations, but why she loves journaling, and also things that just how to become more emotionally powerful and taking baby steps in that direction. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. We get into so much in this episode. I can't wait for you to listen to it. I would love to know what you think about today's conversation with Dr. DiGangi. So please feel free, send me a DM on Instagram. I'm at Jess Cording, all one word, or you can, maybe take a screenshot of you listening to this episode. Feel free to tag me and Dr. DiGangi. So that's Dr. Julia DiGangi. You can sign up for my newsletter, send me an email. I would love to hear from you and what you are getting out of today's episode. So without further ado, let's get into it. So Dr. Julia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessica. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm really excited to speak with you today because I find neuropsychology is just such a fascinating field. And I'd love to know, I love a good origin story. What inspired you to study neuropsychology in the first place?
Well, it is a true origin story. It goes all the way back to my childhood. So I come from sort of a lineage of psychologists. My father is a psychologist, and I grew up he's a very, very smart man, especially about human behavior. And so he was always telling these fascinating stories about humans and their behavior. And, it really came from a compassionate place. So I was always interested in this question of human suffering and human resilience. But I actually never thought I was going to be a psychologist, right? Because I thought this was something that belonged to my father. And he wasn't territorial about it. It just never occurred to me that I could be a psychologist. So I started doing a lot of political advocacy work and international humanitarian aid. So I did a lot of political work. I did several presidential campaigns. I worked at the White House. And then I started thinking, okay, there's all this politicking going on, but I'm very interested again in sort of the social justice and the humanitarian aid. So I started doing a lot of international development and relief work. And I was working really all over the world. So I was working in Argentina, Latin America. I was working in Africa. I was working with traumatized communities here in the US. And what started to strike me was I was in all of these incredibly diverse places. But when people had been exposed to extreme stress, they behaved very, very similarly, regardless of where they were on the planet. And so I said, okay, I really want to look scientifically at this question of what happens to us under extreme stress and what does it take to rise from that? What does it take to achieve resilience? And so I decided to pursue a PhD, which is how I became a neuropsychologist. And what was kind of wild to me is I was working in these macro level systems, right? I was working in the US political system. I was working in the international labor movement. And I really see that until we understand our brains, until we understand our nervous systems, it's going to be impossible to make change in any system, in our life, in our relationship, in our houses, in our communities, in our political system. So I really kind of come from both extremes, this very, very macro extreme, thinking about human behavior, and then this quite literally, this molecular and micro one, thinking about the human brain and the human nervous system.
I love that so much. And I can relate, from my work as a dietitian and a health coach, I found that, I would be asked to consult with somebody based on one health condition, like one thing they had going on. And then the more I did this work, I've been in this field for almost 15 years. And I started finding that a lot of stress, trauma, was presenting in very interesting ways, in different, quote unquote, medical populations. But it was playing a really big part in people's healing, their issues in terms of in my field, a lot about behavior change and lifestyle change and why is someone blocked from making those changes. It was fascinating to see the connections.
Well, and it is interesting that, this is the piece I always have to say, that one piece always leads to another. And so I think people are always looking for the root cause. And the root cause of our lives has everything to do with our emotion. And this is why I am so invested in what I call emotional energy. I mean, the brain is quite literally a machine that runs on the energy of your emotions. And emotions are the native language of every single human being on the planet. And a lot of times we get a lot of messages, both direct and indirect, that we can't express our emotions. And then what happens is suppression. So then, what's interesting to me is the body knows how to deal with all other kinds of toxins, right? It knows how to get rid of food waste. The immune system knows how to get rid of, toxins. The body knows how to convert oxygen and get rid of CO2. But it's so interesting that instead of just experiencing our emotions and letting them kind of dissipate, a lot of times what we do is we're so afraid of feeling our feelings that we really kind of clench down around these feelings. And then that creates all this stuckness. Then that creates all this dysfunction. And then that creates all this sickness.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you're speaking my language. I'm especially fascinated by the ways that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism kicks in when it comes to, in my world, it has a lot to do with food behaviors, exercise habits, ways. Or something I see a lot is when someone's in that flight response, they're always trying to stay busy. That's definitely something I personally have done in my own trauma adventure journey, we'll say. But something I really was intrigued by in your work is that you talk about the difference between actually being in danger and feeling in danger. And could you tell us a little bit about those are different and, how that can show up in our day-to-day life when someone's having a hard time, navigating that difference?
Absolutely. So the key piece here is in order to really deal with painful feelings of fear, you have to understand, are you really in danger or do you just feel like you're in danger? Those questions can sound very similar, especially if people haven't thought a lot about the way emotions work, but they are wildly different. Okay. And the main difference comes down to a single word: repetition. Have I been here before over and over and over? So, Jessica, how when people talk about the fight or flight system, I'm sure we've all heard this example. It's the whole thing started when we had to run from a lion, right? We always hear this, the system fires up when you have to run from a lion. So if we really think about this, how many times in our life do we run from a literal lion? Maybe, overwhelmingly zero, and then maybe once, right? So there's not this repetition. I'm running from a lion today. I'm running from a lion today. I'm running from a lion today. So a lot of times in our adult lives, and childhood is kind of, no pun intended, a different animal, but a lot of times in our adult lives, we just keep playing out the same situation over and over and over and over. In other words, we participate in relationships that don't feel good to us. We participate in conversations that scare us. We stay in positions that we don't really want to be in. So what's happening is it's creating this sense, this feeling of danger, but there's not actual physical danger in the sense that, like, if there really was a lion, if someone was really physically attacking you. And so we have to start asking ourselves, well, if it feels like I'm in danger, what am I going to do differently to not continue to perpetuate the pattern? Because what's really interesting about the nervous system, and this is such a big piece for people to understand, is your nervous system is not really in the business of making you feel good. Your nervous system is in the business of making you feel familiar, okay? So if I have been here before, no matter how miserable it makes me feel, no matter how scared, no matter how disappointed, no matter how anxious, my nervous system has calculated that I can survive it. So if we start saying, okay, you know what, there is really this repetition to my fear. I'm pretty intimidated quite frequently. I'm pretty anxious quite frequently. I know I'm not in danger. I feel like I'm in danger. And then the work comes working directly on those emotional experiences. So what behaviors am I now engaging in that are perpetuating the fear, and how can I be different?
You share some insight on some of my favorite topics to talk about: overthinking, overworking, overgiving. And I would love to explore, maybe one at a time, how each of these can hold us back. So with overthinking, which, I know in my work, I've seen this come up all the time with food. But I know there's so many ways that can present depending on what someone is, what they're needing to work through. Or I know in my life, I overthink lots of things in terms of decisions and day-to-day things. But I would love for you to tell us a little bit about in what ways, how overthinking shows up, in some ways that can sometimes hold us back and impact our quality of life.
Absolutely. So first of all, I call all of these things overthinking, overgiving, overworking, overdoing, overaccommodating. I call them the overs. And what's so important for people to understand is that there's a galactic difference between working and overworking. There's a galactic difference between thinking and overthinking, between giving and overgiving. One moves. So I said that emotion is always our native language. The working, the giving, and the thinking moves from the energy of desire. I desire, Jessica, to buy you this cup of coffee and give it to you. I desire to think about this super interesting podcast. Okay, it comes from this energy of want. It comes from this energy of desire. But when I move into the overs, the overthinking, the overgiving, the overdoing, it comes from the energy of fear. I'm no longer giving it to you because I want to. I am giving it to you because I am afraid of what happens to me if I don't. Okay, so let's go a one level deeper. So the thing that you really need to think about when you're overgiving, overworking, overdoing is, what is the fear here? I'm not doing this because I really want to. I'm not doing this. I'm not motivated from a place of good. I'm motivated from a place of terror. Okay, so then I start thinking, well, what's going to happen if I don't give Jessica this cup of coffee? Well, I think she's going to be mad at me. I think she's going to think I'm not a good friend. I think she's going to think, so it's like, in order to change our behavior, we have to understand the emotional impulse, right? Emotion almost always precedes behavior. Behavior is a much more downstream effect if you think about how the nervous system is wired. So in order for me to change my overgiving, my overworking, my over anything, I need to really look at this deep, deep question of, what am I really afraid of? So I'll stop there and see if you have any other questions, or I just want to make sure I'm tracking with you.
Yeah. So in your work, I'm just curious, with that question of what am I really afraid of? What are some of the things that come up?
Okay. So the heartbeat of, let me say that the heartbeat of all human fear, and I'm going to tell you a little story here that I think is really going to make this clear, is some version of I am worthless. Now, for some of us, that sounds like I'm not good. For some of us, I am inadequate. For some of us, like, people don't want me. But you can hear the energy of, like, I am worthless. Yes, in that. Now, I am most fundamentally a trauma expert. So I've treated a lot of PTSD and I've treated very extreme trauma. So I've worked a lot with combat veterans. Now, when I first started, so I am a civilian. And so when they first would come to me for PTSD treatment, and I was working with guys across different, different continents, different conflicts, different years, I would say, I think I have a pretty good guess what you're afraid of. And I thought that fear would be a fear of dying. Like that's a pretty reasonable fear for a human being to have. But what I heard across guys, across wars is like, yes, we did not want to die, but that was actually not the thing we were the most afraid of. The thing that we were the most afraid of was being the guy on the mission who didn't have his shit together, being the guy that other guys couldn't depend on, being the guys who wasn't ready. So what these men were telling me over and over again was that a fate worse than death was a fate of being worthless, being not good enough, being not wanted. And that really struck me earlier in my career is like the greatest human fear is the fear of being worthless. Now, remember how we just talked about how like there's a difference between being in danger and feeling in danger? There's a difference between being worthless and being afraid that you are worthless. Okay. But because the human brain is so wired, it's like so allergic to this sense of worthlessness, it will react in incredibly vigilant and incredibly extreme ways to protect you from even the slightest, maybe tiniest, minuscule possibility that maybe somehow someone one day could possibly think you're worthless. So even having this conversation, I think, is really clarifying, because let's go back to the silly example of me getting you a cup of coffee. Let's say I just don't have time to do it, but I kind of feel like I need to. So I'm in this energy of overgiving. Well, when I stop myself and say, well, why not? And if I really think not about the logic, but about the emotions, I'm going to have this sense like, I got to do it. Well, why do I got to do it? Well, I just think this is what good people do. I think she's going to be a little bit annoyed with me. I think I need to like endear her a little bit more to me. So you can see how what's really happening here is I'm starting to do all of this super energy intensive overgiving, overthinking because I'm afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that I'm worthless. The issue here is that even if I give you the cup of coffee, this is a really key piece. Even if I give you the cup of coffee, and even if it saves me for that afternoon, I feel better, I get the relief that I wanted, I am still left with this lingering sensation of I am not good enough. I just fixed it with an internal fix. It was an external Band-Aid. So until I'm willing to work on the emotions directly that surround my fear of being unworthy, my overworking, overthinking, overgiving, overaccommodating will continue until the day I die.
I'm nodding because, for those of you listening on audio, I'm nodding because I'm thinking of all the ways that this can show up in our lives and how that can just have such, someone starts off feeling this way when they're young, and if they don't acknowledge it and they continue with this overworking, overthinking, overgiving, just the cumulative effect, and how much that can impact your day-to-day life and, being in that state all the time.
And, let me just add one other piece here is a lot of people think that this is all happening kind of unconsciously, but what they're really trying to achieve, if you really get down to the physics of the overs, the overworking, the overgiving, the overdoing, is what they're trying to do is achieve a sense of certainty. Okay. This is actually the core of every single form of anxiety. So whether it's PTSD, OCD, panic, and not all of us have pathological levels of anxiety, but we all can relate to anxiety. So anxiety, the best definition I can give you for anxiety is it is a disturbed relationship with certainty. And so because I feel uncertainty and the brain is allergic to uncertainty, I start to do these things I think will produce certainty, which is if I give her this cup of coffee, I'm certain she'll like me. If I think about this problem until I'm almost sick about it, certainly I'll find the right solution. If I work until like my body hurts, certainly like I'll be good at my job. So what we're doing through all the overs is we're trying to get certainty, but this is quite literally impossible. Okay. You might as well try to get gravity to stop making things fall down. The one thing that's true about human life is it is fundamentally uncertain. There's nothing, you cannot say with 100% certainty that the sun will rise again tomorrow. I mean, we can predict pretty strongly, right? So the whole idea that we can ever achieve certainty is actually kind of paradoxically, it makes us sick. And the more we try to seek certainty, the sicker it makes us. Okay. Now, most people think the opposite of uncertainty is certainty, which is why they try to do all these overs. But the opposite of uncertainty is not certainty. The opposite of uncertainty is self-trust. It is the idea that no matter what happens, if I really want the job, but I don't get it, I'm going to be okay. If I'm really tired and the thing is due, but I got to go to bed, I'll figure it out. If the people that I want to like me don't really respond in the way that I would hope, I'll still be okay. The best antidote to uncertainty, which it is true, the brain has an allergy to uncertainty, is self-trust. It's how do I hold myself in this emotionally powerful way, even in the moments the world will not give me perfect certainty.
I love that so much because, the self-trust, it shows up in so many areas, right? I think that it is so hard for people to trust themselves. And I think it can show up in different ways. Some people, and I would love to hear from your work. Do you find that some people across the board, do they struggle with self-trust in all areas, or do you find that it presents in certain areas, but not others?
Yeah. So can I actually go back to the origin story and say, like, where does this even really come from? So we all come from parents, right? And I think a lot of us have I think overwhelmingly our parents are well-intentioned, but because parents are human and parents have their own trauma, and sometimes parents even have their own addiction, and parents can do horrific, horrific things to us. Okay. But let's just assume like parenting runs on a gamut. Okay. Even for those of us who had parents that were pretty reasonable, what happens in the parent-child relationship, and I will tell you, the most powerful relationship on the planet without question is the parent-child relationship. There is no stronger form of leadership, and that is because of the neurobiology between the parent and the child. So I said earlier in our conversation that the native language of human beings is a language of emotion, okay? When the baby doesn't like something, it screams. When the toddler is terrified, you're going to know. When I have fairly little kids. I have a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old. When they don't like something, you are definitely going to hear about it, okay? Well, if you really look closely at parenting models, and you don't even have to dig that deeply, you just have to look at it with a new level of consciousness, what happens is the child will start to express strong emotion, and the parent will start to say things like, don't do that. The child will say, I don't want to eat the broccoli. Eat the broccoli. The child will get in a little squabble with one of their friends, and the parent will say, go tell her you're sorry. And the child says to the parent, but I'm not sorry. And the parent says, get over there right now and tell her that you are sorry. So then the child thinks, well, my emotional experience isn't that I'm sorry, but I guess I gotta trust my parent. And so early in our development, we start to outsource the trust of our own bodies and our own emotions, even in the healthiest of families. This is a really important point I'm making, right? This doesn't even go to families that have like pretty extreme intergenerational trauma, right? So even in like a fairly well-functioning family system, we're getting a lot of messages at the most powerful time of our brain's development that we shouldn't trust our own emotions. Here's another one. Have you ever seen a little kid at the park, and the little kid's having a great time, like climbing up the monkey bars, and the parent's like, get down, get down, get down. So it's because, for example, the parent is nervous, but I see this happen all the time where the kid is saying to the mother, Mom, I'm fine, I'm fine. So this is a brilliant example of the parent, well-intentioned, getting in the way of the child's confident relationship with his or her own body. Okay. So now we're adults and we're living fast, complex lives and all kinds of relationships, romantic relationships, social media relationships, professional relationships. Why would we trust our own emotions? We've been practicing for the last 30 years not to listen to. So part of this is really this like very upstream way of saying, let me just listen to the sensations in my body. Okay. Now you had asked, do people have different levels of certainty in different domains? Absolutely. Right. So like if you're really comfortable public speaking, maybe you get on the stage and there's no problem at all. But then when you have to go write something, you wobble a little bit more. So absolutely, we have things that we're naturally more gifted at and we're naturally more well practiced at. What I will tell you though is the feeling of that terrible feeling of like, this is going to be a disaster and people are going to find out about me. Whenever that flares up, it's never because of the situation in front of you. It's always because of this deeper, more underlying emotional energy that hasn't been explored, that's saying something like, I am not good enough.
You're making me think of, this example you're sharing about, parents being nervous and passing that to their kids, but then also those underlying feelings and how that shows up in adulthood. And I want to talk about approval for a sec, because This I feel like is a really big topic. I think that there's a lot of I think a lot of people I see a lot of people saying, "Oh, I don't care what people think. I do what I want." And but then deep down, like I think there is this.
Desperation, desperation, desperation. Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that, just sort of like how that shows up and what impact that can have in our work and in our life.
Yes. What a fantastic question. We will seek other people's approval. We will seek other people's approval to the degree that we do not trust ourselves. If I come and I say, hey, I walk into a room. Okay. Let's go back to you and me. I walk into a room and I'm like, Jessica, I have a fantastic idea. I have this mind-blowingly cool idea that I'm going to do for, I'm making this up, a blog. Okay. I have this great idea, or I'm going to start this company. Let's do that. I'm going to start this company. And your face starts to kind of wrinkle up and your head starts to kind of cock to the side. And you kind of start to speak slowly like, well, Julia, I don't. Now, 4 seconds ago, I came into that room on fire for my idea. I thought it was a brilliant idea. I thought it was mind blowing. I thought it was extraordinary. I thought it could change the world. Okay. Within 4 seconds, and I'm kind of being funny, but I'm actually being dead serious. This is how quickly it happened. We come in, we're on fire for something. We have this authentic vision. We're using our own intelligences. And then someone shows up with a little bit of doubt and we watch our whole vision crumble. Well, that shows you how much the foundation of self-trust, how strong it was before I even came to you. So in other words, in the energy of your doubt or in the energy of your skepticism, or even more generously, in the energy of your confusion, my belief in an idea that I loved crumbled. So a lot of times we say we are asking for other people's opinions, but we are asking for their permission. And until we understand how to hold that energetic line in our nervous system, how to say, I think one of the most powerful questions that we can ask ourselves in this lifetime is this: am I powerful enough? Am I emotionally powerful enough to be misunderstood? In the moments when people don't get it, in the moments when people don't agree with me, and the moments that people don't pay me as much attention as I would hope that they would pay me, am I willing to stay with the truth of what I know to be true about my own life? And if we can't do that, I hope for all of your listeners, all of this is linking together. If I can't do that, I start to feel uncertain. And in my uncertainty, I start to get very, very interested in external approval seeking. And the way I need constant external approval seeking, I start overworking, overgiving, overthinking, overexplaining, overaccommodating, overdoing. So it's like, if I want to stop seeking chronic approval, the answer is, how can I trust myself more? What will happen is people will make these soaring statements, like you said, like, I don't care what anybody thinks, like, I am on fire for myself. Well, that's not true. And when we make these affirmations, in quotes, this is why I don't like affirmations. Your nervous system is the most brilliant machine on the planet. Okay. There's like 300 million years of evolution in this thing. So the part of you that speaks, it's a much newer part of the brain. The part of you that's conscious, it's a much newer part of the brain. So if I go in front of my mirror in the morning and I say, I don't care what anybody thinks, there's one part of my energy that's saying that, but there's another part of my energy that's going, bullshit, bullshit. That's not true. That's not really what you think. And the disconnect between what I'm saying and what I'm actually feeling, that is actually where all of our anxiety lies. We get rid of all of our anxiety when we line up the way that we think with the way that we behave, with the way that we feel. So then the question becomes, okay, well, I want to trust myself. Saying I trust myself enough that I don't care what 9 billion other people think, that's a little too extreme. Can I trust myself today enough to put an unfiltered photo of myself on social media? Can I trust myself enough today to show up on a podcast? Can I trust myself today to actually, when somebody asks me to do something that I really don't want to do, can I trust myself to actually hold the boundary and very politely say no? So there's ways, just like we strengthen our physical health in a gym, we can think about this hierarchy of how to become more emotionally powerful.
I like what you're saying about taking those little steps, or they might not feel like little steps, but it sounds like letting go of this desire for approval. It sounds like for a lot of people, it might look like taking little tiny steps. Does that sound right?
It's 100% right. And we see this so clearly on the physical health side. If I had been like really weak in my physical body and I called you up and I was like, hey, Jessica, tomorrow I think I'm going to start an Ironman. You'd be like, that is a terrible idea, Julia.
Right.
Like, can we calm it down about, I don't know, 100 degrees? So I think we do the same thing with our emotional power is like, we feel bad and then we ricochet to the other extreme, right? We ricochet to the other extreme. I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm going to be totally confident. It just doesn't work. It's totally unsustainable. And it's actually a form, get ready for it, of the overdoing it again, right? So the overdoing, where does it come from? It comes from a place of fear. So if I'm not perfectly confident by Friday morning, my life is hopeless. Like, what? That is a what? Stop thinking, stop doing that to ourselves, right? So how can I think about, I'll give you a few examples that are really actionable. I think we all struggle with this. Where are the ways in my life that I'm exhausted? My body really hungers for rest and I overwork. Give me a couple of examples in your life that would really be restorative to you and make them mild to moderate. So I'm going to go to bed at 8 o'clock. I'm not going to look at my cell phone before 9:30 a.m. I'm going to turn off social media for 3 hours. I mean, they can be the most manageable things because what you're really going for here more than anything is a sense of momentum. What you want, even in a way more than, because what is the destination of self-trust? What is the destination of success? What you want more than these entities themselves is the sensation of progress toward those things. Does that make sense with the way I'm saying that? We want the sense of like human beings are on this planet to evolve. So we want the sense that there's this evolution. I'm getting stronger and stronger. I'm getting more self-trusting and more self-trusting. I'm getting wiser and wiser. So there's this sense of movement and evolution. And I think when we frame it like that, it becomes a very powerful and very soothing context for our lives.
I really appreciate you sharing that because I know in my work, one of the primary reasons people come to see me is they want to lose weight. And after decades of dieting and trying all the things and dealing with all the diet culture nonsense in our world, they suddenly decide they're going to try this. And they, I cannot tell you how many times I've had, I take a small steps approach because as you're saying, I find that when people they master one tiny change, it builds their confidence. They get into a flow. You can see it. There's this shift that happens where they do start to trust themselves because they show themselves they can make changes that help them move towards their goals in a meaningful way. But we're just sold this idea that we have to do the extremes, that's the way to, in this case, lose weight. And I cannot tell you, I've had so many times I tell them they have to eat more than 1,000 calories or that they would benefit from eating more than 1,000 calories. And they're like, that's too much. How am I going to lose weight eating more than 1,000 calories? They're like,
but can you hear that? Can you hear the panic in that? I know you can because you're obviously so expert in your job, but like the whole, like, I can't eat more than 1,000. That's not fast enough. That's not good enough. Like, you can hear again from the frequency of fear and not from the frequency of faith. So they're asking this question, what if? But what if is a wildly different question if we say, I trust myself, I trust this expert, I trust God, I trust my body, whatever you need to trust, right? So the frequency of faith is an entirely different frequency than the frequency of fear. And the energy, one of the things I always tell people is, so I work in a lot of relationships. I work in high conflict couples, I work with individuals, and I do a lot of coaching of very senior leaders. So people will often say to me, I did this good thing. So for example, let's say I'll use a quote from kind of the business arena. People will say, I often hear leaders say, clarity is kind. So they'll say, I gave this person feedback and clarity is kind, meaning I said something, it didn't go over well. How could I possibly be wrong? Because I was trying to be honest and transparent and clear. And I always say, I have no idea if clarity is kind. You got to tell me the energy in which you did it, because there are two different worlds. One world where I said the most kind of like awkward, maybe even offensive things, but my energy in that moment, you felt me. I was really trying. You could tell I was really invested in you. You could tell I really wanted the connection. You could tell this was really hard for me. There's another scenario where the words coming out of my mouth might even be exactly the same, but my energy is cold. You can tell I can't wait for the meeting to be over. You can tell I'm already on to the next thing. it does not matter what you do. It matters the energy of who you're being. And that matters in terms of our relationship with our own bodies. It matters in our relationships in our home. And it matters most importantly with like our relationship with ourselves. And the reason I wrote Energy Rising is because far too much we think about the things we're doing and we're not thinking about the energy of who we're being.
I think, the energy piece, I grew up, my she's a psychotherapist and a hypnotherapist. I grew up being taught all about energy, like the law of attraction and more energy, on a more, we'll say like a woo-woo kind of level, but also just practically how you're showing up. What are you putting out there? And that makes such a big difference. And something that I have, being in we'll call it a helping profession, something I know I have had to become very intentional about is setting boundaries with my energy, protecting my energy. Because when I don't do that, I can't be as good of a provider. And I imagine, and I mean, we all, I think, where we're interacting with other humans, we have to be thoughtful about this. But I would be curious to hear, what are some things that you have found to be non-negotiables for managing your own energy and helping ensure that you show up the way that you most want to show up in the world and with your clients and interactions with others?
Well, what a fantastic question. I want to say here, I always say I walk the work, meaning I think it's easy when you're an expert in a neuropsychologist and emotional power. I won't speak for you, but maybe an expert in like being a dietitian, that people think that you have all these things nailed. So for my case, like, do I have parenting nailed? Do I have my marriage nailed? And I know I'm in the mid. Part of the reason I do the work is because I'm in the work. And this is a journey of great evolution. So I'm always thinking about like, what really are my non-negotiables so I can show up as effectively as possible. And, I work with such intense trauma that I think a lot about my energy and how it's affecting me. I will say for me, one of the things that I do every single night, and I'm incredibly disciplined about it, is I free write. So every night when the kids go to bed and the moon is out and like the energy is just soft, I get a pen and a paper. I like my journals. And without thinking, I'm not trying to tell a story. I'm not trying to, deconstruct my day. I just free write. And the reason I actually do this, it's the neuroscientist in me, is that the most integrated human being, the most powerful and healthy human being is a human being who knows what she feels and feels what she knows. So a great way, and we have two systems in our brain, one system that thinks and one system that feels. So a great way to link those systems together, so they're kind of operating in alignment, is just to kind of write from your emotions. Because the second you start putting your emotions into words, you're linking the emotional system to the thinking system. So one of the things for me that is truly a non-negotiable is free writing. And I'll tell you two others. The other thing that's non-negotiable for me is every single night without fail, no matter where we are on the planet, we do a gratitude prayer as a family. Because again, life is about the meaning we make from it. And on the hard days where you're like, I just want to kind of quit today. Those are the days that like dragging myself to the table to do the gratitude prayer, I think gets the most mileage. It's like, how can I continue to reframe my life in the most emotionally powerful way? And the final thing, which is becoming more and more of a non-negotiable, is I'm getting increasingly into plants. So I forage. I'm just as a hobbyist, I do a lot of work with like medicinal teas and herbs. I find that to be very grounding and very much about both the biology and the human spirit. So this idea of the mind-body connection.
I love that. And I love a good plug for journaling. I have kept the diary or a journal, we'll call it, since I was 8. Like, I just feel lost if I don't have it with me. Like, I can barely handle going to an event where I have to have a tiny purse and I can't put a notebook in there. But yeah, if I don't put the pen to paper, at least in the morning or the evening that day, like it just is weird. It does not.
So you do it every day too?
I have to. It's just, if I don't, it's like the universe it's like something is very wrong.
It organizes it. I mean, it quite literally, I'm not being metaphorical. It quite literally organizes our brains.
It is. I'm a huge proponent for journaling. Like,
yeah,
I always tell people, no one's going to read it, like, unless you want them to. But I always joke with my husband, I'm like, hey, like, if anyone ever comes across my diaries and my journals, they'll be so bored. Like, it's for me.
That's funny. I know. Well, because mine are like really this free writing, they're not really organized. Like you would be like, it's a mess. Like there's things on different pages. There's no coherence. So I agree. It would make no sense to anybody else.
So I know I have a few questions I wanted to ask you, but I did want to check and see, because the brain is just, there's so much we could dive into here. But I wanted to see, is there something that you wish everybody knew about the ways in which our brain influences our behavior? Like something that you wish was just common knowledge?
Yes. That is, I'm so glad you asked me this question. I have been put on this planet for one reason. And that reason is to share with people this message. All of these horrible feelings that we keep trying to frantically avoid, our feelings of fear, anxiety, inadequacy, disappointment, anger. Okay. I understand that these things don't feel good, but because they don't feel good, we chronically avoid them. We chronically avoid them. We deny them, we numb them, we run from them. Okay. Those painful feelings that you believe with all of your heart are here to torment you, they are not here to torment you. They are here to set you free. Everything that you want in this life, a sense of wholeness, a sense of safety, a sense of confidence, a sense of well-being, lies precisely on the other side of those feelings you can't tolerate. I say this with such certainty because I have done this work for 20 years and I have done it in the most extreme forms. I have watched people work with the most significant traumas that if they told you, I'm not getting up again, you would say, that makes complete sense to me. But there's something about the human spirit when it's willing to engage with our own suffering, however our suffering presents, that it redeems us, it strengthens us, it actually softens us, it makes us more human, it makes us more wise. So I think this message that is so hopeful, it's like we think that we need to run from our feelings of inadequacy. Quite the contrary. Open up the floodgates and let them in and watch how it purifies you and brings you to everything that you had ever hoped.
I have like goosebumps thinking about that. That's so, I love that way of looking at it. I'm excited to get to share that. So, all right. Last questions I always ask my guests on this show. So for people to, learn more about your work, connect with you, buy your book, what's the best way for them to do so?
Well, like most people these days, I'm on all the social channels. So you can find me at Dr. Julia DiGangi on LinkedIn, Dr. Julia DiGangi on Facebook, Dr. Julia DiGangi on Instagram, and my website, drjuliadigangi.com. And if you're interested in this idea of how to work with your emotions to become the most emotionally powerful version of yourself, I hope you'll check out my book, Energy Rising, which I'm so excited about.
We'll be sure to link to that in the show notes to make it as easy as possible for people to find that when they listen to this. All right. So, Julia, one last question for you. And I love asking this question because there's so many different ways to look at this topic and this term. But that question is, what does healthy living mean to you today, this moment in time, and this point in your evolution?
Healthy living means to me integrating the three engines of your brain, or my brain in this case, right? So your brain has three engines. It has an engine that thinks, it has an engine that behaves, and it has an engine that feels. A lot of times we create a lot of unhealth. We create a lot of pain. We create a lot of dysfunction in our life when we break those engines off from each other. So for example, I feel exhausted, but then I use my engine of behavior to overwork. I feel like I want to say no, but then I say yes. I feel like I want to speak up, but then I keep my mouth shut. In all of those moments, I had divided my power from myself. So the healthiest human being, the most powerful human being, most vibrant and alive human being is the human being that says, let me use all of my energy to work in integrity for myself. And so I really start to think, how is how I'm thinking aligning with how I'm behaving and how I'm feeling? And that to me is the healthiest way to live.
Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessica.
And for all you guys who are listening out there on your devices or in your homes, maybe you're taking a walk, you're doing the dishes, whatever you're doing, thank you as always for being here. I so appreciate your time, your energy. If you like what you hear, please feel free to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. They do matter and they help me continue to bring you great guests like Dr. Julia. Otherwise, guys, have a wonderful day and we'll talk soon.
Thank you for listening to Drama Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. We'll see you next time.